What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Markets with Dave Lauer. I am your co-host, Pink, and we are returning to our monthly macro discussion with our panel of experts. We are so excited to welcome them back. Claudia, Sahm, and Ophir Gottlieb, thank you guys for joining us today. It's been an interesting spring, so we're really excited to catch up with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, likewise.
Did you guys get to catch the eclipse, the solar eclipse? And did you do it responsibly? Because Dave and I were laughing about, we both traveled to Totality. And so we got to, we were both close enough that it was a day trip, different regions of the country, but we both got to have that experience, and which was amazing and spiritually grounding and makes you feel infinitesimal in the whole grand scheme of things.
If you've never seen a Totality, 100% try and get to one. It was something special.
That's awesome. For sure. So did you guys get to see any of it?
Just a partial. And we did have the glasses. So responsibly looking at the sun.
I responsibly did not see it.
Have you ever seen one?
You're pretty far, right?
I am. Yeah. I did. But I've never been in the path of totality. Nothing like what I had friends too who actually went near Dallas and they had like 4 minutes of totality. It was just mind blowing.
I just had to head a little east, and it was, you read about the difference between 99% and 100 being as much as 1 in 100. It just might as well be different events, but it's really hard to grasp that unless you've seen it. So it was a really awe-inspiring thing.
Yeah.
There's one coming in a couple of years from California to Florida too.
Is that right?
Yeah. I think in 27.
Yeah.
Hopefully before World War III.
Or maybe World War III
in the
brings
middle.
along totality.
Maybe that's the omen. We will consult the entrails after the eclipse. See how it goes.
Well, it stopped a 6 years war before, right?
Yeah,
so maybe it'll do us that favor again. Everybody will be so awestruck.
Yeah, maybe.
So up or down the interest rates, everybody's like, I see things by proxy a lot through like Wall Street Bets and Reddit's eyes. So I get a really cynical, not always accurate view of things. So I always appreciate, which I think a lot of our audience can relate to as well. So I really appreciate having a balanced conversation with you guys on what's happening.
Wait, we're supposed to be balanced?
I think, aren't you the cynical one we determined?
Yes.
But you bring balance to it all. So, yin and yang and all that. So,
yeah, no, I mean, I think so far in our conversations, it's been pretty optimistic. It's been pretty confident on the soft landing story. And until this morning, I wonder if this morning changed anything. So today's Thursday. This morning, there were several economic announcements that came out. So GDP came out at 1.6%. It was estimated at 2.5%. That's Q1 GDP in the US. And the previous was 3.4%. Core PCE came in at 3.7%. The estimate was 3.4. The previous was 2. And then jobless claims came at 207,000. The estimate was 214,000. The previous was 212,000. So jobless claims stronger than expected. GDP much weaker, but the internals maybe not terrible. We can talk about that. Core PCE may be the most concerning amongst those numbers. And now, as far as Twitter's concerned, we've entered stagflation. So, yeah, but I'm curious, like, does this change? It's only one number, sure. With those caveats, does this leave you guys concerned at all about the soft landing story? And what do you think these numbers mean for where the economy's at today?
Yeah, thank you. First, I would push back vehemently on stagflation as a narrative. I mean, we might get there, right? Like, everything is on the table. Everything is possible. And yet we're not at stagflation right now. The economy is strong, right? The claims numbers, frankly, there was nothing there, right? They've been low. They've been really low. So, and that's good, right? Like those are unemployment claims, both the initial and the continuing. They look great. And on the GDP, yeah, 1.5%. That was not so great. I had to rewrite the lead to my Bloomberg opinion piece today frantically. Now, if you look under the hood, of course, I wrote this into it, consumer spending, business investment, the fixed investment, so take the inventories
Fixed
out.
investment was up a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, the business, they looked great, inflation adjusted. And especially for business, if you think about how much higher interest rates are, that just underscores the cash flow, the people coming in the door, the customers, if they're still able to put money into their businesses, that's great. Right. And those two pieces, consumer spending, business fixed investment, they are um, there's something like core GDP, right? Because they're much less volatile than, say, inventories, net exports, government spending. And so those are the pieces at the Fed that I was taught. I mean, I focused on consumer spending, but I was taught when you think about GDP, look at those two pieces, consumer spending, business fixed investment. If those look good, the outlook is good, right? And so those look good today.
Mhm.
And really, they're still at a pace that I would look at and say is above trend. Right. So that's good. The what knocked us off the consensus above 2, we brought in more imports and spent them. I mean, consumers are still spending. So we brought in more imports, and the ad from inventory investment was a little bit less. I mean, these two, especially inventories, is like forecasting white noise. I mean, those things just move around wildly. Net exports could end up being a story, but it's generally not. Like it moves around. So I looked at it and I was like, things are good. And that's why I really push back on the stag part of stagflation, right? Like
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
don't see that yet. And frankly, I don't think we will. As long as the American consumer sticks with it, the labor market will stay solid to strong, and then we keep going. Now, the first quarter has been really rough on inflation. And frankly, I was not just opening it up this morning. It's like, come on, couldn't we just catch a break on these numbers? Um, we'll find out tomorrow about the monthly numbers with the personal income release. Today we get the quarterlies, but when you look at them, it's like something almost certainly revised up in January and February, and we got some bad news on March inflation. Now, I don't want to explain this away. I do think the Fed is going to push out and drag. I mean, there's a real case to get into the fall, maybe even towards the end of the year. I still think they want to cut. I don't think there's a case for inflation accelerating, but it's got to slow down in the second quarter, or like we're done for this year in terms of rate increases. And then you have this no landing thing where we kind of grow and inflation stays too high, but not that high, right? So I mean, this could be okay. It's not what we went into the year expecting. And so it's disappointing, but not like start getting really depressed. Just, push on.
Yes.
Not time to panic just yet.
No,
Yeah, just it.
I agree with everything Claudia said. I just wrote a piece. I said growth much stronger than headline, but inflation is hot. You can't, the inflation part, I can't say there was a January effect or that. It wasn't a good Q1 for inflation. And it did interrupt a rather clear and powerful disinflationary trend. If it's just a quarter, it's a quarter. I don't know, but we can't just say that it was January. So I would agree with that. I think the economy is very strong. The stagflation argument for now, I actually said this in what I wrote. I put an ellipsis for now, and we don't have stagflation. You can make an argument the economy is doing particularly well, and this was just a weird read. The 1.6 number was a weird read, but the 3.1 on final sales to, is that what it was? Final sales to domestic private purchasers, that's a really, really good number. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
The inflation part, I don't see a reacceleration, but I have to say that I thought we were going to continue a disinflationary trend. As Claudia said, in December, we were feeling pretty good about the disinflationary trend, I think. Fully aware that January could be weird and just kind of like, and now it doesn't feel so good. It does look like there were revisions to January or February, or March is just going to be gangbusters. So in a certain sense, let's hope that's what it was. I'm not fearful of a recession yet. But you know, today wasn't awesome news on prices. Like there is something to be said about the people I disagreed with on, let's call it a sticky inflation, but stickier than sticky. And you know, I at this point I would say the data points to me being maybe slightly too. I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, so sticky inflation might be the case. The Fed, do you think that if this trend holds, where inflation stays either around where it is or even continues to tick up, do you think rate hikes might be back on the table? Do you think do you think the Fed, Claudia, is uncomfortable with this being persistent, you know, with these levels being persistent for much longer?
Yes. I mean, the Fed is uncomfortable with any inflation above 2%. So and this is exactly what they'll be watching, right? If the second quarter does not start to really soften up and we get more disinflation, then more and more we'll be talking about the potential to raise rates. I don't think that should be the base case right now. One thing that I look at that speaks towards disinflation, although at this point it's so hard to believe it will happen, is a big part of what is left in inflation is owner's equivalent rent.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
huge in CPI. It has been, I mean, it is off. It's higher than it would normally be by so much that even though its weight in PCE is much smaller than CPI, like it's a lot of what's left in core. So in terms of owner's equivalent rent, so it sits in the bigger category of shelter, right? So for people who pay rent, their rent contracts, that's a piece of inflation. And then to make it kind of equivalent, for people who own a home, they we calculate their inflation, the prices they pay for shelter, as owner's equivalent rent. What that big clunky term means is essentially you're living in your house. What could you get if you rented out your house? And that's kind of like what you're missing out on because you live in your house. So it's a very wonky concept, but it makes homeowners a lot like renters. It's kind of like a shadow rent or an equivalent rent. Right. So it's just to keep, apples and oranges together in terms of shelter. Not every country measures it like that. So it's kind of tricky to know what to do with homeowners. That's owner's equivalent rent. When we talk about personal consumption expenditure inflation, so PCE, that is the target measure of inflation that the Federal Reserve looks at. It wants it to be at 2%. It's not at 2% right now. It's moving there, but they look at personal consumption expenditure inflation. The more popular measure that we hear a lot about is consumer price inflation. So that's the CPI. And the difference, there actually are several, but the big difference is the CPI is essentially what you pay out of pocket. It does have that owner's equivalent rent, which is a little wonky, but in general, it's what people are paying to make purchases themselves. The PCE inflation, it includes all of what you purchase yourself, so everything that's in CPI, and then it includes things that are purchased on your behalf. So a really good example of this is we all pay our health insurance premiums, and yet our insurance carriers, if we were to get sick, they pay for the hospital stay or some portion of it, the doctors. And that kind of spending on your behalf shows up in personal consumption expenditures. And then we got to put a price tag on it, and that's in PCE inflation.
And there's one bit that I'll add to that, if you don't mind, Claudia. The reason I'm imputing a reason. I think the reason the Fed prefers PCE also is that there is a substitution effect. The PCE weights are changed every month. CPI is, I don't know, once a year. So it's this basket of goods. And that matters. I'm going to give a really obtuse example, but I think it's very illustrative. Just pretend Nothing else in the world changed. One thing changed. The price of bread went to $10 million a loaf. Nothing else changed. It just magically. In CPI, we'd have infinite CPI. PCE 1 month later would measure that people are no longer buying bread, they're buying rice, and the price of rice hasn't changed. And so PCE would actually adjust very, very quickly. And it's this substitution effect, this sort of monthly reweighting, that makes PCE a little bit more in my opinion, it's not a statement of fact, in my opinion, more reflective of the inflation that people are facing. Although, again, some people would argue that actually CPI is better, but that's an important part, I think, the substitution effect, if you don't mind me adding.
Mm-hmm. Nope. Now, and we got recent data on the new tenants rent index, also comes from Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's a lot of caveats around that number. It's still experimental, it revises, but it is so clear as to what direction rents have been going, the spot prices. So, frankly, it ought to be a little uncomfortable for the Fed to be basing forward looking policy on data that we know is probably the most backward looking data in the entire inflation series, right, with the owner's equivalent rent. Now, they're going to lean on it because they're scared about inflation. But honestly, it's not like we should ignore it. Like, it's a real thing, but we should understand how its measurement works. Now, it's been like waiting for Godot for this thing to start to really disinflate. I think we got a basis point on the year over year in March on CPI, and it's just like, come on, like, where is this? So that is the case for the disinflation to pick back up. It was part of the very messy January. If you look in CPI, kind of focusing in on that, we are basically down to two categories of inflation: owner's equivalent rent and motor vehicle insurance, that are high relative to before, and they also account for a huge chunk of the acceleration that we saw in the first quarter. Now, PCE is a little different because motor vehicles are different, but we are down to so many fewer enemies in the fight against inflation than we were in 2022. That's encouraging. And then, like, these enemies, especially owner's equivalent rent, have been a total pain for quite some time. So it's hard to be optimistic because it's just been so counter to what was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So let me ask you that, because I was talking about this with someone on Irvin just yesterday, I think, where I posted about this, and I called out exactly what you just said, that it's really in rents and auto insurance. And they said, well, what's going on with auto insurance? Why do you have any idea why that's acting the way it is?
Yeah, so auto insurance, I have been adamant from the beginning that COVID has been the root of all evil, particularly in the inflation set. And so we're into the echo stages. So if you think about it, motor vehicle and related industries are some of the clearest examples of how COVID has worked through. Like, we had the supply chains messed up. We couldn't make new cars, so new and used car prices went up. They've come down. Then we had motor vehicle parts went up. That was, there also is the supply chain. Those have come down. Maintenance, then it's moved into services. So maintenance started getting affected because they had more expensive cars, more expensive parts, and labor shortages. Those have turned. Motor vehicle insurance, which there's more going on in it, and yet motor vehicle insurance has gone up a lot, reflecting the prices of the cars have gone up, the maintenance prices have gone up, and they got hosed on their profits early on because they couldn't adjust their contracts fast enough. So that one has not turned. Likely, at least that piece will, but it's also as an industry using, hey, prices are going up, let's just reprice all our risks. I mean, there's other things going on than COVID, but you can just see these waves working their way through, and yet it's the lesson of things are way more interconnected than at least I had appreciated as a macro forecaster, and it's so slow working its way through. So yeah, but there are other pieces that did pick up. I mean, you look across the board, even if they're not big contributors, that inflation, you saw rises, right? So you need a lot of things to correct back down. But it's just, and you don't want to get too fixated on particular categories because it's really about the overall, and you don't want to be head faked by relative prices. And yet, like, there are some clear stories to tell about what's going on.
I agree. I think that it's very dangerous to look at CPI or PC, doesn't matter, to look at an inflation measure and then to pluck out the parts that are anomalous and say without them everything's normal. It's like, yeah, but that's what happens when you take out everything that's anomalous. Everything looks normal. It's a tautology. Having said that, and now going to contradict the thing I just said, auto insurance makes clear sense to me. I mean, COVID was the irritant, and the further we get from the irritant, the less irritated we will be. But that industry, the insurance is back then, right? We're covering vehicles and their value and their parts and their maintenance. That's just going to go up and it will come down. But the thing that's really bothersome is OER. That we saw OER was too high. We knew it was a big chunk. It's 32% of CPI and 42% of core CPI. Like, it's a huge thing, but like it should have cracked by now. I feel. I don't what should have is according to Ophir, which means nothing. But like we should have seen it crack. Like it just every measure of private rent, whether it's the BLS's new measurement, Zillow, apartment list, we have enough real-time measures to just kind of heat check. Like where are we? They all point to the same thing. There's disinflation. There was actually deflation in a month, actual deflation, negative inflation for a month. Granted, that was probably not seasonally adjusted, but like OER is very, very frustrating. And I did a little back of the envelope calculation, which is not very hard. And if OER, owner's equivalent rent, came in, if it came in where the private indices are, not this new one that's been created, just the private, like CPI is at like 2.4 and nobody cares, right? We're like victory. And now it isn't, and you can't just do that, but that one is absolutely confounding to me. It was clear as day last September, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's going to come down by Q1. It'll come down. We'll be fine. No. And even though it's backwards looking, and even though it's done twice a year and all these things, it's not coming down. And it's starting to make me feel uncomfortable. Not that we have too high of rent, but that maybe BLS isn't going to receive it. Maybe it's not coming down for much longer than we thought. And there's some anomaly in the way BLS is collecting it. I don't know. I mean, nothing's changed, but it's not so unusual for housing to be the problem. Claudia, I think this is right. Correct me if I'm wrong. During the Arthur Burns era, when we were finally clobbering inflation, we took home prices, so the price of homes, not the rent, out of the inflation computation, because it was like, look, this is just discombobulating everything. We just got to take it out if we're going to get inflation to where we want to be. So part of it was Arthur Burns just like, iron fist. Part of it was like we took housing prices out. I don't know that there's a stomach to take OER out, but like we have seen it before where it's like housing doesn't really return us to the inflation we need. And so we make these adjustments. I don't want to sound the alarm bells, but like, I'm definitely surprised. I knew there was a lag. This lag is way, way longer. And every month the data comes out, I'm looking for it. I'm like, are you serious? Like still? So I'm not sure we have a dour conversation about inflation if OER was even halfway in between where we think it should be, and it is. It just wouldn't. But here we are. So
yeah, no, and it was part of the disappointment in January. Not just this, we thought more disinflation was coming. It's also, it had picked up some pace in the second half of last year, and then it just ground. I mean, really, in January was a step backwards on OER. And we're going to, today we have the quarterly data on GDP, the inflation reads. Tomorrow we're going to get the monthlies. And as I said at the beginning, the quarterlies for core PCE look like crap. I mean, they were 3.7%. People were looking for 3.4. If you dig into the release, the market-based core PCE, 3.1. Like, so you had this big gap open up between the two of them. Again, if today we had 3.1, we'd all be throwing a party. Like, it's like instead of 3.4. So but owner's equivalent rent is in there, right? With those imputed non-market prices, as is financial services. We get a great stock market and we get clobbered on financial services. So we have these those are prices. The Fed absolutely is not going to go in and pull OER out,
no,
right?
I was
or even they'll. I think like I said, it's tricky for them because it's such a backward looking. They won't go in and grab it out, and yet it's like this mess of these imputed prices, which on some level, what I want is people to be able to pay their bills. more, right? So wages keep going up. That's what I want to see. And those market prices, right? Like that's what I want to see. Like food being flat, maybe even coming down. Like nobody's out there being like, oh my gosh, I could rent my house for so much more, but I'm not, right? So as long as like in the real world people are moving along, I'm not going to get like super excited about imputed non-market based prices. And yet, I mean, those are the numbers that the Fed is reacting to. And the
Mhm.
longer they keep interest rates high, the higher the chance goes that we break something. And then we're not talking, I think the risks on a stagflation are way lower than the risks on a recession
Yes.
and a hard landing. So
Yeah.
that's where it's like, I do hold my breath when we open up CPI or PCE. And I mean, really, if we don't start getting some better ones, it's going to be crushing. But and they might raise rates. I mean, my goodness, if they raise rates, you talk about the probabilities of the hard landing going up,
Well,
right? There is stress on the economy. So I'm still optimistic. It's just it gets harder and harder to be optimistic. And you don't want to hold on to a story that's not
That's
right
right.
anymore.
That's right.
You know, I do really have to check my bias coming into this year, which I think was, tied to data, but I got to keep tying my story to data. And yeah, the data requires some shifting. I mean, whether or not we pick it back up with the disinflation, whatever the rate cuts where we were thinking, like maybe in the summer, they're out to the fall, right? Like it's going to take a lot to make up for the first quarter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one thing we've seen happen is we've seen, at least looking at CME FedWatch, for example, we're seeing the probability of a rate hike continue to get pushed back and back. And it's not just, to me, when I look at these numbers, which say, a 29% chance of a July cut. Sorry if I said hike, cut. A 29% chance of a July cut, and more of a 60% chance of the September cut. What strikes me is not that it keeps getting pushed back, but there's such uncertainty at this point in the market. And you look at, for example, the numbers for where we're going to be at the end of the year in December, and 10% is all the way down to 4.5%, and almost 20% is that we're here where we're at. There have been no cuts, and so I feel like the market was far more certain coming into the year about what the Fed was going to do. And now there seems to be a lot of confusion. And then if you look at the market's reaction today to the economic numbers, again, it's like it just doesn't seem to know how to digest this. It sold off pretty hard when all the numbers came out, thinking that the rate cut is further away. And it's recovered almost all of that now. I mean, it's, I don't know.
I think the market change in direction, has it changed? Oh, sorry, it hasn't changed that much, has it?
I don't know. I'm looking at I'm looking at a chart of SPY right now, but I see it hit something like almost, what was the low, like 497.50, touched it, and now it's back up to 501.08, which is just a little over $1 off where it was.
I think the realization that GDP wasn't as bad as the headline was really it.
I feel like the market is digesting it, just like we sort of just talk through it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that at this point, really to echo what Claudia said, is like at this point, no matter what your not no matter, but if your perspective was one such that I held, which I think is similar to Claudia, I'm not going to speak for her, but she has spoken for herself. Like it would be almost obtuse not to at least start to question your biases. You just have to. This wasn't the Q1 I was anticipating, and kind of it wasn't really even close. It wasn't like, oh my God, but it wasn't even that close. In particular, the numbers today, which imply what happened either backwards or what we're going to see tomorrow. And yeah, that's not great. So I do think that if GDP numbers stay strong, if you're talking about the stock market, just leave rates where they are. They don't care. Just keep giving a strong GDP. Not every is a big word, but most of the large fund managers I'm speaking to, they're like, just give me GDP. It's fine. And just I don't want to see a spike in inflation, but sticky, they don't care. Just give me growth. And today was maybe the first day where we're like, well, maybe you're going to get inflation and not GDP. So
okay, let's drill into it for a sec, Ophir, because One thing that one really good thing to take out of the GDP number, as we sort of mentioned earlier, was the significant increase in fixed investment, which increased by 5.3% in Q1, which is far higher than the past 2 quarters, and right in line with the Q2 of 2023. And you had tweeted, I don't know if yesterday, you were looking at manufacturing, and you said manufacturing returns. So
boldly stating. Oh, pardon me.
Is that prescient? Is that what we're seeing? You know, it seems like there is, at least under the covers, there's good confidence in the economy. There's a lot of investment being made. You know, is this the kind of thing that just takes time? You know, like with the CHIPS Act, for example, there's and with the IRA, there's just huge amounts of money right now flowing from the government into manufacturing. But it takes time, right?
It does, but it changes sentiment for those people quickly, right?
Right.
A little bit different. The money hits later, the sentiment, you know. So I don't know if it was prescient. It was sometimes I have to be careful of what I tweet. But yeah, manufacturing is looking better. And there was a time when manufacturing, not so long ago, a year ago, was like, uh-oh. Like if you listen to the people who were calling for recession, really their argument was leaning on PMIs and manufacturing. Honestly, that was the argument. They're like, we're going into a manufacturing recession. It's like, well, apparently not. There were good things about this GDP report. Fixed investment was good. I'm not terribly concerned about it. I think the headline scares people. But since I'm reassessing my level of confidence in the disinflationary trend, I mean, isn't it natural that now I have to at least consider a reassessment of my view of the strength of the economy? I still feel it's strong. In fact, I wrote this morning, like, it's a strong economy. We're doing well. But is there a chink in my armor now? Yeah, a little bit.
I think that the GDP and inflation are probably going to play an outsized role heading into November.
Yeah.
You know,
sorry, I cut you off.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Like, I mean, like, you know, what do you think? What do you think things are going to look like as people head to the polls? Is there a reason to be concerned that the economy, that a weakening in the economy or persistent inflation could play a significant role in the election?
So my impression of when the CPI comes out, the GDP or Jobs Day, the reaction to, I mean, I might as well as ask people, hey, who are you going to vote for? And then I'll tell them how they feel about the data that came out. I mean, I finally left Twitter. Took some steps to make it like a forever thing. Like, I can't even get in my account. My teenager has the keys to it and she's not going to give it back. So because it's like Zero Hedge and a couple of like really horrible FinTwit accounts just like were just bashing on me and sending hundreds upon hundreds of their like unpleasant followers. So I just like, enough is enough. And that was because I tweeted out 2 Fred charts. Like 2 shots, like data. And
how dare you tweet Fred charts?
Don't let facts get in the way of a bad argument.
No, it's just, it totally blindsided me. So I just, because at some point, like if I say Jobs Day is a good day, just no, it is not a good day. And I say, like, really, anything you say about the economy, what gets projected back onto you, and I get it, it's an election year, right? People are trying to, it's all about the economy. It's not really. Like, the economy gets used as a weapon because, I love this. There was I think it was Wall Street Journal did this survey, and they asked people, how are your finances?
Yes.
How is your community?
Right.
Look good. Not super. I mean, inflation's high, right? Like, but look good. How is the economy?
That's right.
Totally awful. Right. But the economy is not something we live in. Like, specifically, it's this like conjured up. And so then you very much react to whatever narrative that you're hearing about it. I think what matters at the end of the day is, can they make ends meet? Less what they're hearing, although we are so blasted in so many different forums now by our team's interpretation of the data. So, that's what so the election is just going to be a mess, and it's not going to it's politics. And that's what I mean, focusing more on the Fed, like, they have decisions to make, and they are not going to let politics get in the way of that. I mean, I feel very strongly that they're going to put their head down and do their cuts or increases whenever they have to. We won't be able to prove that after the fact, but I would be beyond shocked if they got into the middle of it. And thus, it's good to have a conversation in that space, or people who are making investments. Like, they actually care about reality. They want to know the guts of owner's equivalent rent. So I'm trying to stay in that space because my lane is being a macroeconomist. My lane is not getting somebody elected. So I would just stay out of that. But yeah, so it's going to matter for November, but not in a reality-based way.
I think that's true mostly, which is to say what Claudia said, it's the tail is wagging the dog. It's not the economy is doing well and therefore I will vote for fill in the blank. It's that I'm going to vote for fill in the blank and therefore I think the economy is. I think there is a risk. I'll just push back a little, very slightly, that if there's actually abrupt movement in the economy, I don't know how that would be measured at this point. I'm going to throw it like ethereally, just, I don't know, something we objectively agree upon that was abruptly good or bad. I think that could impact this sort of very thin line of independent voters who are going to determine who gets elected, because every state is going to be, the only states that matter, 7 states that matter. It's like 14 people in each state. It's no longer a national election, really. So I think that could impact it. I don't think that will happen. So Claudia's reality that like people view the economic data in the scope of their political views, not vice versa. So that's probably going to play out, in which case we're just going to have a crazy election season and it's not necessarily going to be about reality or anything. But I think there is a chance something good and or bad happens in the economy that is outside the band of like, depends on what your views are. I think it's super interesting what she was saying. I saw the same thing, that people think their lives economically are pretty good. Inflation matters, but like they're feeling really good about their lives. But it's just this incredible disconnect between what they think is happening in their lives and they think everyone else is experiencing. It's very, very bizarre. I don't know if I've seen that before. It's like, I'm doing well, but everyone else, man, it sucks for them. And it's like, why do you feel that way?
It's like some weird like corollary to the vibe session theory, right?
That's
now
right.
Suddenly like people are feeling better individually, but now they're projecting it more.
It's interesting. And I think to the point you made, if something sudden happens, and when something sudden happens, it would hurt people, like a lot of people in their real lives. So like a recession is all over the place. If in the Mideast something just completely goes off the rails and gas goes up to $5 a gallon again, I can think of more bad scenarios than good ones, but those would hurt people where it counts in terms of their, and then if you can get into their space in some development, then it's likely to affect them. But something like, we're looking for the owner's equivalent rent, the disinflation, that is going to mean nothing to anyone, like if that happens, except for the Fed, right? And people doing tips and things like that. So there are some bad scenarios, but I agree. The geopolitics, I just don't have a good enough sense of. But in terms of recession, despite the fact that there are many people that seem to be out there who want one, who are totally not even dealers, like I think we're still in a place of strength to withstand. We could be towards the end of the year with straight up GDP reads of 1.5%, right? We could moderate quite a bit, and yet that's still, we're still moving along. That's very different than a -2%, a -1% unemployment up. So I think the base case is we still push through, but there are absolute risks, and the White House is not in a comfortable place, I'd say, by any stretch.
Yeah, if we had if the disinflationary trend that seemed, we have to use the word seemed now, seemed apparent as of Q4 of last year was persisting, then I think the White House would be in a much better situation. At least they would perceive that they were. I don't know if human beings would, but we're not for now. But we have a Q2, we have a Q3. I mean, what are we going to do? But yeah, also geopolitics, especially in the market, which can influence sentiment. I'm talking like the stock market, the bond market, the commodity market, tends to be overstated, and we actually tend to do better. Now, is that like a dark view of humanity? I don't know, maybe. But there is a possibility that the Middle East isn't as bad as we think, and oil prices come down and gas prices come down. So one price consumers know to the 10th of a penny. You can ask most people what the cost of, I don't know, bread is, and a lot of people wouldn't know. Gas, they'll tell you to the 10th of a penny.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you what happened last week, what happened the week before that. That's the number. And I think there's certainly a chance that number goes up, but there's also a chance that number goes down. So.
And
I do think geopolitically, I don't know, I want to say dodged a bullet in terms of what happened over, I think it was last weekend, in terms of Iran and Israel, and it did not blow up like it could have.
In particular, the Iranian press's characterization of what happened, which was a total fallacy, but it was absolutely perfectly delivered to the populace. Like, okay, it wasn't just not an escalation; it was very much a de-escalation. Also, the Congress and the president signed something for the thing that we, this geopolitical concern we have elsewhere, and it's a miracle, but it happened. And so
it is.
I'm just saying, like, it happened. Like, this bill passed, this money passed, this funding passed. That I think many people.
And that's more money injected into the U.S. economy, because most of that, just goes to manufacturers of U.S. weaponry, right?
Sure, but I think it prevents. Well, let's say it lessens the problem. Here we go with me predicting the war. Let's talk about way off the rails now. I think it lessens the possibility of some really dark outcome come November of 2024 about Ukraine and Russia. Right? Yeah. We could have weaved that tale if this never happened. Now it's like, all right, that disaster. I mean, the Ukrainians are going through a disaster. Please, I don't want me to minimize their suffering. I'm saying is this, like, as an American who sees nothing, it's the odds of a real disaster there, I think, have come down a lot, which is that could add some calmness or reduces another irritant that we could have seen.
Okay, I want to switch gears just a little. I mean, we're not entirely. We're still talking macro. I just want to talk more about jobs and unemployment. And Claudia, I think you've got a pretty optimistic view on what's going on in the jobs market, what's going on with unemployment numbers. In a recent piece, you talked about how higher state level unemployment, which people have been pointing out, is actually a good thing. And we're also seeing in the U.S. immigration start to ease the stress of the jobs market. And so all of these things seem really good. Do you want to just dive into that a bit? And another thing, just to add on to that, is workforce participation is a particularly interesting number, one that a lot of people are constantly citing to say the jobs market isn't actually as good as you think it is. And after seeing enough of that, I yesterday pulled up the BLS chart, and to me, workforce participation looks like we're right back at this base level that we had between October 2013 and the pandemic of, anywhere between 62.4 and 63.6% participation rate. So which became the norm despite much higher participation rates in the past. So it seems like to me that's a good story, and a lot of people keep painting it as a bad story. Am I misinterpreting that?
Overall, the U.S. labor market is in a great place, and it got even better last year with bringing in more workers. Right? This was the reason that we were able to have the disinflation last year, to have inflation come down and have consumer spending still 3%, GDP 3%, unemployment below 4%. Right? Those things weren't supposed to happen together, because typically the inflation is, very textbooky. The inflation is there's more demand than supply can keep up with. And so prices get pushed up. So the Fed comes in, they raise interest rates. What are they doing? Taking away the customers, right? It's lowering the demand. That's the tool they have. Instead, what we've had happen is bring the supply back. And a lot of these were started at the beginning of the pandemic. It took quite a while, but one piece of supply that we really saw come back last year were workers. So we solved the labor shortage with more labor, not fewer customers. We got the disinflation by getting more supply online as opposed to getting demand down. That's really Like that's the Goldilocks scenario for fighting inflation. And where did those workers come from? So one key group were immigrants. And through the lens of the economy, the immigration that we have seen in recent years is full on a good thing. Now, there is a broader conversation about, what we should be doing to have a more orderly immigration process. But we saw 2 years ago, 2 million. This is by by Congressional Budget Office estimate. So 2 million on net immigrants came in. Then we had 3 million last year. We are on track to have another 3 million this year. That's 2 to 3 times the average before the pandemic. So this is huge. In the Bloomberg piece that you referenced, what I was making the argument is a lot of these states we've seen unemployment go up. Well, unemployment can go up for a quote unquote good reason if you have workers coming in and it takes some time for them to find a job. And what I noted looking at all these state unemployment rates is some of the states that have the biggest shares of their population that are immigrants, they were the ones that had the big increases in the unemployment. And it started well. And it doesn't explain all of it, but that's where the unemployment rate was in the states was giving us a signal about the good news story at the national level, because part of the national drift up in the unemployment rate is likely immigration. And now I'm like, oh, I can see it, like where because immigrants aren't, spread out evenly in the country. So we had immigrants, women's prime age women's employment rates hit an all-time high last year. We had other marginalized group like Black men whose labor force participation, I mean, it's kind of bounced around a little, but it's been up at or even above its historical high. So we brought these people in, they could do a lot more. And and these are in prime age. We have seen relative to before COVID, labor force participation overall is kind of back on its downward trend. That's population aging, right? People kind of pulled forward retirement early in the pandemic. Again, this is why immigration is so important. We are a country that has been able to offset some of that decline in participation, which will keep coming because of aging from a population that wants to come here and work. And women,
so like most things with we can blame the participation rate dropping on the boomers. So anytime I can blame something on the boomers, I'm going to jump on that.
Yeah, well, I was taught early on, if there's a problem in the economy, it's the boomers.
It's the boomers.
But it's like, hey, go retire, then I can have a nicer job. So there's a process of growing. But this is where the immigration's been so important, and we really saw it last year because they helped us get something that was supposed to be impossible with inflation coming down. And so that was one of the COVID supply problems, one of the last ones that we made real progress on. So, but not everything is sunshine and roses. There, as I said before, every month that the Fed waits to cut interest rates, there is a risk. And you can see, certain sectors, certain kinds of jobs. Hiring had been very strong in a lot of places, at different points in the pandemic. Getting back to normal means moderating that, and it's really easy to go from moderation to falling down. So it's kind of a delicate landing that we're trying to do. But if you look across the board, there's a lot to be really thankful for in the economy. And I don't think the Fed looks at the strong economy, a good jobs day, as the enemy. I mean, frankly, it gives them some space to wait. And as long as it's coming from more workers and that supply, they've really been willing to back off on, we don't need below trend growth. We can do this. But if by the time it is evident in the labor market that things are going south, it is too late.
That's right.
So
that's right. Yeah, I would say, Dave, when you're looking at charts for labor participation, look at prime age.
Okay.
Just change what you're looking on the Fred. Look at prime age. You're going to feel a lot better. I mean, it didn't sound like you didn't feel well. I think you'll feel better.
I think a lot of people out there aren't feeling great. So maybe that's a good tip for them. And maybe we'll include that chart.
Just look at it. And also, I mean, there were bobbles, but this wage disinflation story is happening. Real wages are higher. Finally, they're growing. But wage disinflation is happening. That story has actually persisted. And that, like, at the very least, like famous last words, the wage price spiral argument should be put to bed, I think. Like that, for whatever whatever your political views or economic views are, or your identity economics, we call it, our political identity, like the wage disinflation story has persisted. Real wages are real wages. Real wages are growing, and that wage price spiral is just not there. I thought that story was dead a year ago. That story's like dead now. Watch next month. So no, but that's really good news, and it has been immigration. The immigration story has been unbelievable, and yes, there's another part of the immigration story. I got it. We're talking about the economy right now, not political views. But I agree wholly with that. And prime age labor force participations, it was actually almost at an all-time high not too long ago, and yeah, there's a little bit of a dip, but those numbers, there's the differences in those numbers are not statistically significant yet. It's like don't focus on 0.2 or 0.1. We're not there yet. So.
Sounds great. All right, I think this has been great. I don't think we missed anything that we didn't talk about. No. So again, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the insights and information. And we're excited from Irvin's perspective because next week is the public launch of our platform. So anybody will be able to join. Thank you. And so please join us on Irvin next week if you're not already. And we'll see you.
And we have a macroeconomics community too. So we're ready to welcome the conversation where we join. We share a lot of the conversations from there. So yeah, you can.
I think more of my posts go into that community than any other because that's just what I enjoy talking about. So yeah, that's a good point, Fink.
All right, so definitely come join the conversation with us and sign up. You can sign up now, but we just have a beta wall. We still have a wait list up until May 1st, but you're still welcome to join us and create an account for free. We have a quick turnaround on that, but we will be officially taking that wall down on May 1st and debuting our verified shareholder communities as well. So definitely a lot of exciting stuff happening on platform.
Big May Day coming.
Yeah, and it's pretty timely as we discuss this over the corpse of X.
Yeah,
I think that's funny.
Yeah.
Fair.
So thanks everybody for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we look forward to the next conversation. We'll see you next week. We are having a conversation with Georgeson on unclaimed property and state escheatment. So definitely want to stay tuned for that. And thank you again to Claudia and Ophir for joining us today. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.